Ready?
Yeah, let's go for it. Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming and being here with us this evening. Tiger Launch is super excited to kick off its speaker series with James Cole. And so I guess we can just start off, James, if you could give a little bit of background about yourself and what your company, the H Hub, is all about. Yeah, we could just jump right in.
Sure. Yeah, I'm super excited to answer your questions, Naomi, and the questions of anyone else. I think I work best when probed, and I also just want to make sure this is useful to everyone. So I'll try to keep my thoughts brief. So I went to Princeton. I was class of 2012. I was sort of a weird Princeton student insofar as I majored in visual arts, which at least at the time was like two people a class. Um, I focused in photography and also did some art history courses, and didn't quite know what to do with that. So I went into advertising after discovering that I wasn't going to hack it as a professional photographer. And I worked at a huge ad agency in New York for 4 years. Then I had done a lot of sort of like content creation there, even though that wasn't my job proper. And I actually got recruited because people saw some of the content I created for the big ad agency to run content for a startup in San Francisco. And it was like a huge, my dad calls it a welcome to the NFL moment, where I sort of realized how tough startups can be. Like 3 weeks into being there, half the company was fired because they had a bunch of money pulled by an investor. And so I still had my job, but like no budget or sort of none of the things that I'd been promised were there when I sort of got up to speed. So I had to learn how to make content very, very affordably. And it was through learning how to do that that I sort of got the idea for my company now, which is called The Hub. And The Hub connects 40,000 photographers all over the country to brands. So we focus primarily on food and beverage brands. Michael, who joined us just now, was our all-star intern this summer from Princeton, and helped with a lot of our sales efforts. So we focus primarily on food and beverage brands, and we connect 40,000 photographers to, hundreds of brands a month that need photo shoots, from, product shoots to lifestyle shoots and so on. And that's sort of my story.
Awesome. So can you talk a little bit more about how um, the hub got started, kind of like where the idea came from, and how it supports freelancers, the gig economy?
Yeah, so I always say that startups are formed, in my opinion, in one of two ways. One is sort of the like consulting way, which is sort of reverse engineering. By the way, can you still hear me, Naomi?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. It flashed to someone else. Um, so yeah, companies start in one of two ways. The consulting way, which is sort of looking at a space, reverse engineering some sort of opportunity and like solving a problem with your mind. And then there are companies that sort of come out of your heart, which is to say you're solving a problem for yourself, or you sort of walk face first into some sort of a solution to a problem, and then you sort of tumble into starting a company. And that's very much the experience I had. So I worked at a big ad agency. I saw massive budgets being used for like very subpar social media content. Then I went to a startup and ran content for them, and for fractions of the budgets that I'd had access to before, created hundreds of shoots a month. And sort of saw the opportunity, right? Like there are so many young, talented creators, so many talented photographers across the country, and there are so many brands that need content. Why not try to wed the two? So I think it was just through sort of toiling through this content creation exercise at the startup that I realized like what a massive opportunity was being missed. And as the startup where I was working sort of disintegrated into financial turmoil, I decided to leave and start my own company. There was like so much momentum, so many connections I had with young, talented photographers. And I saw such a bright opportunity that I couldn't stop. Like I didn't want to sort of give up on this little engine that I was creating within another company. So I just sort of transplanted it and started it on my own.
Mhm. Awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about the gig economy and how you ensure that the hub is supporting freelancers in the best way possible? Um, yeah. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'm a huge believer in the freelance economy and sort of the decentralization of the workforce. My poor little brother, for some reason, ends up being the butt of a lot of my pontification. And for like 5 or 6 years now, even before starting the company, I've been talking about this. So you see it in Uber, obviously, or in Airbnb, or in a lot of different verticals, going from a centralized solve to a problem, such as like a hotel chain, for example, to a decentralized solve, wherein apartments all over a city are made available to people that are traveling. Um, by fairly conservative estimates, by 2025, half the workforce will be freelancer. 28-year-olds have worked an average of 4 jobs already. And that's only increasing. So like by the time you're 28, Naomi, I'm sure you'll have worked 4, 5, 6 jobs, maybe even more. Whereas like our parents, for example, most of them, worked a job to maybe 3 by the time they were 28. So this idea that you can sort of have lots of fractional experiences, learn something from all of them, and that your unique supply, like what you have to offer the job market, Naomi, can elegantly match with demand, right? Like there's a company out there who needs someone exactly like you with your exact need, with your exact skill set. And so more elegantly matching supply and demand is something that I'm very fascinated with, um, whether it's photography or indeed any other vertical. So it's something I'm passionate about. And I just so happen to tackle this problem within photography, which is to say there are 100,000, 200,000 incredibly talented photographers all throughout the country, from New York to LA, but also in Oshkosh. And, I have photographers in Albuquerque or Jacksonville, Florida, what have you. And so connecting that disparate talent to large brands, be them in Los Angeles or equally in remote locations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of running a startup with so many, we have 40,000 videographers and photographers. I'm sure that it can get kind of chaotic or uncertain at times. And as someone that's interested in entrepreneurship myself, I would love to hear, like, how did you come to embrace that chaos or kind of find security in it?
I think there's a sort of 2 separate questions. So like one mistake I made, there's an analogy when it comes to marketplaces, which is my particular type of business, like the business model that I've pursued. The analogy is like if you and I were to start a supermarket, Naomi, let's say we found all the best produce and we put it on the shelves, and then we went outside and tried to get people to come in who like fresh produce. By the time we fill the supermarket, the produce will be sort of wilted and not so compelling. But the alternative is filling the supermarket with shoppers and then frantically trying to source all the produce and having the shoppers wonder where the hell the broccoli is. And so what I did is I like really, really dug in and got a lot of photographers and built like a pretty profound community of photographers before even letting one brand in the door. So when we began, we were just a community of photographers that like went on trips and wore hats and like shot together. And it was very much just a community, not so much a marketplace, shall we say. And so because I committed to that so intensely, I was able to attract over 200,000 people to apply. And we accepted almost 40,000, 39,500 or something. And unfortunately, the result of that is that like 95% of the photographers on my platform have never gotten work on my platform. And 5% of the people on my platform get all of the work on my platform. And so I think if I were to do it differently today, I would yes, attract the supply side first, but be a little bit more prudent as to how wide and how aggressively I recruit, because I feel like I'm disappointing a lot of people all the time. So that's just like one stray thought about how I built the supply side. As to like embracing chaos, I mean, my grandfather was like, he actually went to Princeton and he played baseball there, and he would often make sports analogies when I was a kid. And he would always tell me to try to hit the fastest pitching I could, like put myself in a room with people that challenge me or opportunities that challenge me the most, and that's where the best growth would be located. And I've always found that to be true. Like I'm an entrepreneur's entrepreneur, which is to say like would be manic. Like I just have endless abounding energy and enthusiasm and ideas and so on. And so putting myself in challenging situations, and the fact that like pretty much every week since I've started the company has been harder than the week that preceded it, I find like utterly enlivening. And the growth that I've sustained over a very, very short period of time is like quite profound, and challenging, and like has reduced me at various moments. But personally, I love that bleeding edge of order and chaos, and trying to quell the chaos into order. Like that bleeding edge is what I find more compelling than anything.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of throughout that process, and as you grappled with chaos and order, did you ever have any doubt that, like, about the existence of the hub, and kind of what led you to develop clarity of why the hub is so important, like why it should exist?
Yeah, profound doubt. There was a period of time where like things were particularly tough. I don't really watch TV, but I like went into Netflix and I was like, I should just find something sort of mindless. And I discovered the show Criminal Minds, which after you get over like the first 18 horrific murders is actually somewhat entertaining. And there were like 14 seasons, and I just watched Criminal Minds endlessly. And Criminal Minds starts and ends with a quote every episode. And one episode when I was like really in the thick of it was an Einstein quote: "The question that makes me hazy, am I or the others crazy?" And for me, that's always been emblematic of how I feel as an entrepreneur. Like some days I feel like, you know, a would-be visionary, right? Like I'm seeing a market, I'm seeing an economy, like tens of thousands of young photographers could have jobs because of me, right? Like that feels incredibly exciting, enlivening, and sort of abounding with potential and opportunity. Conversely, almost every day, at least in the beginning, I would profoundly doubt myself and feel immense imposter syndrome, and that it was all sort of a ruse, right? Like I was just sort of faking it, and I didn't know what I was doing at all, ever. And so I think that like walking that tightrope, right? Like I've seen many an entrepreneur fail for being too headstrong and too unable to sort of get out of their own way or to take feedback. But conversely, I've seen many entrepreneurs fail doubting themselves constantly and like not able to sort of trust their swing, as it were. So I think learning to walk that tightrope and believe in yourself, but also check yourself and take feedback from employees, investors, advisors, friends, family, what have you, is very important.
And kind of going along with that, I mean, there's this culture on being an entrepreneur that you have to work endless hours. Like you're not that 9 to 5. It's basically you're on 24/7. You have to sacrifice so many things to kind of pursue your vision. Do you think that this is true and that it's necessary? And why, if so?
I'm like deeply grappling with this question right now. Like my little plane that has been like climbing and climbing in the sky is finally sort of reaching cruising altitude. We have some semblance of, you know, we're profitable. We have some semblance of normalcy and of relative calm, as compared to the past 4 years of like utter chaos. I struggle with this question. I think like one of the hardest balances is to feel good enough as a human or an entrepreneur and to believe in yourself, and then to constantly feel not good enough. Like Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator, says that a startup isn't a startup unless it's growing 5 to 7% every week. So every week you like pump your fist, you like accomplish something, and then the next week you have to be 5% better, and then 5% better, and then 5%. So definitionally, if you just repeated what you did last week, you are not good enough. You're perennially not good enough. And so that can become quite addicting, right? This feeling of like, and I think it's something that a lot of Princeton students grapple with, like even as undergraduates, just like you go from being elite in your little world, in your little high school, to feeling perennially not good enough at whatever it is that you supposedly excel at on campus, right? And that drives you forward and brings the best out of you, but it can be utterly demoralizing. So I guess to answer the question more pointedly, like, yes, I think the most rewarding moments, like Michael, who's on the phone right now, interned for us this summer, and I really fed off of his energy. Like, he really threw himself into the hub and gave a lot of heart and soul into his work. The whole team fed off of him. Like, it was nice having fresh blood. And we all worked like longer hours than I've worked in recent memory. Like, I was working 80-hour weeks pretty much all summer. And I felt utterly enlivened by that. The more I put in, the more I seemed to get out, and it felt like a positive feedback loop. But at moments, putting energy into the company has felt like it was sapping me and taking opportunity costs from other things like relationships or hobbies or self-love. So I don't quite know how to answer the question. I think, yes, entrepreneurship, like anything worth doing, you need to give all of yourself to. You need to like find elements of your soul to donate to this cause that you didn't quite know were there in the first place. But conversely, if you can't find some semblance of balance, you'll burn out. So it's just about finding that type, finding that balance.
Yeah, and kind of in response to finding that balance, what advice do you have for what should we say no to, whether it's entrepreneurship and business and life, just in college? Like how I think that's something that a lot of I know I struggle with it. I know I have a lot of friends that struggle with this. Like saying no is very difficult, and I'm just like curious to hear like how you feel when it's appropriate to say no, when it's appropriate to say yes.
Yes. Well, this has been one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn. I think every entrepreneur, every human has to learn this. It's actually an important human lesson. I think like we all like to get into Princeton, say you have to have tried to please a lot of people. Like you've had to say yes to a lot of things and excel and output quite a lot. So learning how to say no when like for years or decades you have pretty much said yes and exceeded expectations always is hard. Someone with my temperament, again, like abounding energy, like I want to say yes to everything. I want to sort of plant every seed and water everything. And there was sort of this misconception I had that like the more I outputted, the more the company would grow. But if you've ever like pruned a tree, say, you sort of learned that like inefficient branches take energy from the mothership. Like you need to prune a tree so that the branches that you want to succeed can succeed. And so I've learned the hard way on many occasions to say no, right? Like by letting employees go and having a smaller head count, by killing parts of the company, like pieces of software that I thought were a great idea, by nipping initiatives in the bud when it's clear that they're not going anywhere productive, right? Like anything that exists needs to be fed. And if you have too many things that need to be fed, then you spread yourself too thin. And startups definitionally have a shortage of energy, of people, of resources. So saying no is actually one of the most important things. And immense restraint is actually like a hallmark of a successful company, not the opposite. So I had to learn that the hard way, like many times, right? And sort of curb my temptation as a person to output. There's an analogy I like that Napoleon famously didn't open his mail for 2 weeks after receiving it. Have I told you this?
Oh no, that's just keep going.
Yeah, Napoleon wouldn't read his mail for 2 weeks. And the reason why is because he knew that he would be distracted by like all kinds of little odds and ends. And so if he just left everything unread for 2 full weeks, by the time he opened the mail, most things would have sorted themselves. And only those things that were still an issue were worthy of his time and energy. And it was his way, his forcing function of sort of focusing his energies. Warren Buffett famously makes a to-do list every week of 20 items and then erases 15 of them and just focuses on the 5 most important. So restraint and saying no is incredibly important. And then I think also like for a Princeton student or just a young person, like a lot of the people listening right now are 20 or whatever, like doubling down on your strengths, on who you are most fundamentally. If you say yes too frequently, while it's good to explore and to experiment, I think if you water too many things, you neglect the aspects of yourself that are most promising. And so to say no gives you the opportunity to really focus on nurturing the aspects of yourself that are most profound or most aligned to your core being. So I think saying, like, learning to say no sooner rather than later is a good thing to put into practice.
Mhm. Is there anything that would make you stop wanting to be an entrepreneur, or stop like pursuing new ventures or new projects?
I think there are different flavors of entrepreneurs, right? Like I am like full bore. The company is fueled off of suction cups, which are connected to my soul. Like that's the kind of entrepreneurship that I'm indulging in at the moment. I don't particularly want to be like 37 and that way, right? Like I hope to have a family. I hope to be a very present father and like partner. Um, I hope to spend time with dear friends. I hope to spend time in nature, and like the pace that I've set, the level of obsession that I have with what I'm doing, I can't quite put into words. It would almost be worth trying, because I don't think people realize like how deep you can get into a thought or series of thoughts. So no, I don't want to be like this obsessed for too much longer, but I always intend to have projects, and as per what my grandfather said, like be putting myself in situations where I'm hitting faster and faster pitching. Like I hope that whatever happens with the hub, whatever happens with my current pursuits, that I'm able to leverage those to get into other rooms that I find compelling or interesting. And then the last thing I'd say, which is maybe sounds a little cocky or something, but it's a way I've been conceptualizing things lately. Like, have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Yes.
Classic Christmas movie. So like the crux of the film, for those who haven't seen it, is like the main character is considering killing himself, and an angel shows him what the world would be like if he never existed, and all the people that are better for his being alive. Um, and so I think we all aspire to like touch others, help others, to unearth what makes us special and share it. And I think if you touch 10 people or 15 or 20, like that's a very successful life. You know, your immediate family, your friends, like those in your community are better for you having walked this earth. I think if you're a teacher or a doctor or a, you know, whatever, maybe it's a couple hundred people or 1,000 people. Technology enables us to really have an outsized effect. And like, to the extent I've in the past couple of years unearthed what makes me special, and my entrepreneurial experiences help me hone my my craft and leverage technology. I think I aspire to touch hundreds of thousands or millions of people through things that I do, and that's the standard that I hold myself to. And if I were to die having not helped as many people as I possibly can with what I feel makes me different, then I would die unfulfilled. So I think I'll always be chasing that.
Yeah, so there's
Is
clearly
that lighthearted enough for you, Naomi?
yes, yes. So there's clearly a lot that is happening kind of in the background that the public doesn't see. Um, and I'm just kind of curious, like, what was a time or an experience that you or someone that you know may have had that entrepreneurship was just not what you expected, not what kind of you imagined based off of like the public's conception of what being an entrepreneur is.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship, like I was home like 2 or 3 years ago around Thanksgiving, and my parents had a dinner party, you know, with like, they tend to be friends with slightly older people. So these were like 65, 70-year olds. And they asked me what I did. And I grew up outside of Princeton in a very sort of like, you know, in a culture that is very East Coasty and sort of prep schooly and so on. And so when you're asked that question, like, what are you up to, young man? There's a certain expectation that you're going to like impress them around your parents' dinner table, right? And I was so uh, dejected, you know, I was going to disappoint these people by telling them about my like sort of young startup that was wandering about and trying to find its way. And instead of like um, confusion or judgment, I felt like excitement and enthusiasm, which blew my mind, that even like 65-year-olds find like entrepreneurship to be like a viable path. Like, I'm not sure that would have been the case 10 years ago. And certainly the people on this Zoom call and like what you've started, Naomi, what you're doing at Princeton, um, it's very much part of the zeitgeist, right? Like entrepreneurship is sexy, it's sought after. It's like the entrepreneurs of our time are rock stars, right? But I think there's so much that's lost in the romanticization of entrepreneurship. Like, for one thing, like I was talking to someone who was an early employee at Facebook, and he was talking about how even Facebook was stacking S curves, which is a nice little buzzword you can take back to the classroom. Stacking S curves is like no growth, profound growth, no growth again, and then starting the process over. And if you can stack them on top of each other, you can create some semblance of a line going up and to the right. But even Facebook, he said, for like the first 3 or 4 years was like, they'd hit a growth patch and then they'd be like, how the fuck are we going to recreate this? How are we going to get more growth? And they'd have to like frantically strive for the next way to grow. So I think like I could regale you with 87 misconceptions about entrepreneurship, but like, it's never the rocket ship. It's never the like hole in one. It's never the quick rich scheme that people think it is. It's mostly sustained and intense pain, self-judgment, confusion, being out of your depths, imposter syndrome. Like, so again, I guess this romanticizes it in a different way, Naomi, but I would say like entrepreneurship is about who has a high pain threshold and who can sustain feelings of inadequacy for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And is this kind of why you think like it's important to build from the ground up when you're getting to MVP?
I think that actually exacerbates the problem, right? Like entrepreneurs, many of them flex supremely confident. Like most people meet me because I'm extroverted and loud, and think I'm extraordinarily confident. And anyone who knows me remotely well will tell you that it's sort of exactly the opposite. On my best days, I'm a realist, and on my worst days, I'm a sort of a pessimist who thinks he's worthless, right? Which is part of what drives me. I think entrepreneurs over-index as being insecure. And as a function of that, they want validation very, very badly. And that comes in the form of like an outsized fundraise or some press that's very exciting, or like some sort of outside validation that says that they are the question that makes me hazy, am I or the others crazy? That they're the visionary. They're not a madman. MVP, this idea of minimum viable product, starting your idea humbly, simply, quickly. What's a like 2-week version that you can launch for $3,000 and test? Mm-hmm. Most entrepreneurs have very elaborate ideas in their heads, and to execute them properly might take months and hundreds of thousands of dollars and so on. And then when it makes it out into the world, they have this moment where they realize that 82% of their idea was ill-conceived, and that the market actually doesn't value what they thought it would. And so MVP is the process of humbly putting a little something out, getting feedback from the market, and then iterating and repeating the process. And that humbleness is hard to codify to your friends when they say, how's it going? What's your progress? What's the latest? And you say, well, like I have like 2 new customers, or I did a really great like customer interview today, or I set up, whatever it is. Like telling them about the little brick that you put in the massive wall doesn't win you any headlines. It doesn't scratch that need for validation. So MVP is ever important, but also antithetical to the deep need for validation and the hunger for growth and actualization that most entrepreneurs have.
Mm-hmm. So kind of building off of that, then if there's no like benchmark kind of MVP moment, how do you measure kind of scaling? Is it just a series of testing and refining, or is there like, what is your scale process?
Oh, on the contrary, there are wonderful benchmarks, and in fact, because most people skip this step, they're not very well known or talked about, which always surprises me. Like there are wonderful diagnostics for like how close you are to product market fit. A great book for this is called The Lean Startup, which is basically all about finding product market fit in the leanest way possible. So one diagnostic is a retention curve. It depends on what your product is, but let's say like 10 customers is doable. Try to get like 10 customers a month, say, and then track each cohort. So the 10 customers from January, track them over time and see how many of the 10 like continue using your product over time. If 0 are using your product by March, that implies that you didn't solve a problem for them because they didn't come back. If 7 come back in March and April and May and so on, it implies that you dramatically solved a problem because they're coming back. So having an asymptote whereby people return to your product and use it again and again is resounding proof that you've solved a problem. Another one I like is if you were to poll all of your customers and say, how disappointed would you be if my company no longer existed? Not disappointed, neutral, somewhat disappointed, very disappointed. If over 40% of people say very disappointed, you've hit pay dirt. And if 4% of people say very disappointed, then you haven't. And so you really shouldn't move on to the next step. You shouldn't invest more money. You shouldn't raise more money. You shouldn't hire anyone else until you hit those critical thresholds. And the hardest bit is when you get that feedback back, you haven't made it yet. And your immediate next thought is like, I need money. I need to hire someone. Like you want the pain to go away. And so you start reaching for things. And it's in that exact moment that you need to sit with yourself and be like, I'm failing. Why am I failing? This isn't working. What iteration or change can I implement? And it can become quite addicting and exciting, Naomi, like the act of iterating ever so slightly and then seeing something improve ever so slightly and then iterating and then improve. And if you can find joy in that process, like these are all truisms of life, right? Like the journey, it's not the destination. It's like it's the ever so slight improvement week over week that's worth waking up for, not the $1 million exit, right? And you really learn that through being in the trenches for, 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, I just kind of going back to the external validation. Have you ever seen the show Silicon Valley?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I live in that show.
Yeah. So I was interesting on your thoughts. There was one part where one entrepreneur failed. His company just crashed and burned after he accepted a super high valuation. Yeah. And so I was wondering kind of your thoughts on, is that realistic? Is that possible? And did he do the right thing by accepting it, or should he have kind of gone along with what the other character did and devalued himself when there was a lot of hype building up around the company?
Yeah, I think it's a good emblem, say, right? Like a good proxy for what we're talking about just now. The way it would actually happen mechanically is you would raise it too high a valuation. You'd get a shit ton of money. You'd retain more equity than you should have because you have to give away less of your company to get the cash. And then when you go to raise again, you would raise what's called a down round because you've underwhelmed investors. And so instead of raising it, say a 20 million valuation, which is what you raised at previously, you might have to raise it at 15 million. So instead of progress and raising at a bigger valuation, showing growth and excitement, you humbly have to go back hat in hand, get more cash at a worse valuation, implying that over a year or two, you actually got worse, not better. And so that can be the kiss of death, whereby investors won't even invest, right? Like you raised at a 20 million valuation 18 months ago and now 15, like, why are you going backwards? I'm not going to invest. And that's how it would implode. It wouldn't be as instant as they presented on the show. But yeah, this idea of like, the more humble you can be, right? Like Gary Vaynerchuk, who I've met with a bunch of times and is loved and hated, by marketers and entrepreneurs alike. He says, he who can hold his breath the longest wins. So like delaying gratification and put off raising. Why? Because the longer you put it off, the better valuation you'll get. You'll have your pick of the litter when it comes to partners, which investors often are not, right? Investors are sometimes just money. If you put it off and you are more formed as a company, you can more carefully select which investors you work with. Those are just two short examples, but The more you can delay gratification, delay taking seismic action, usually the better for the company.
Yeah. And kind of just a final question before we enter some Q&A. How has like the pandemic, how has COVID affected your business, funding, raising? I mean, how did it affect the hub, and what kind of advice do you have for either companies who, you know, the pandemic destroyed, now they have to pivot, or how do you make companies being like able to handle risk?
Yeah, well, I say this with like immense hesitation, right? Like the pandemic, lest we forget, is a terrible thing that has killed 200,000 people and, you know, tens of millions of jobs. And like, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. So I say the following with like immense respect for that. But a bit of what I spoke about earlier, which is like the power of restraint. When I was a kid, the only TV my mom would let me watch was the cooking channel, because that's what she liked to watch. And every cooking show I came to find would function with some element of restraint, whether it was time, Rachel Ray 30-minute meals, or like using one ingredient as the secret ingredient, or what, like they would limit dramatically the capability of a chef, and out of that limitation would bear out immense creativity and excitement for the viewer, right? Every single show's like that. And so restraint is important. Self-imposed restraint is hard, and externally imposed restraint is easier. COVID is like just one of many examples. Like not to sound cocky or like I'm giving myself too much credit, but like if you can't handle immense restraint, you're not going to succeed as an entrepreneur, because whether it's money or personnel or time or whatever, like you're always dealing with that. So for me, COVID was yet another example of like immense restraint, which meant that I had to be more clever with how I spent my time, money, energy. And I'd say 98%, it's been a boon for us, not a bust. I will also say though, that I was going to sell the company prior to COVID and was talking pretty seriously to two businesses that were going to buy us. And COVID killed those prospects. So I was sort of forced back on the bucking bronco when I was pretty much ready to get off, and had to look within myself to find a second wind. And so I don't mind admitting that like I was sort of waving the white flag. I was going to get an exit and to be able to tell people that I sold a company and so on, but more or less I would have viewed it as a failure. I would sell the company for less capital than has gone into it. And yeah, the company's very different today, much tighter, much healthier, much more successful. And I dodged a bullet sort of thanks to COVID, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for kind of answering some of mine and my team's questions. Really appreciate it. And now I'd love to open it up to kind of the floor for anyone who has any questions about anything that has been mentioned or something that's been on your mind, or truly.
Yeah, and in case it's not overwhelmingly obvious, like my goal is to be like really, really, really honest. Obviously, my opinion is just mine and my experience just mine, but I'm not here to like window dress or to pretend to be someone better than I am. So if there are questions people have about entrepreneurship, about mental health, about whatever, like it's been a bumpy ride for sure. And I'm happy to shed light on the successes, but equally the bumps, you know?
Feel free to use the chat function or just unmute yourself, either or. Yeah, either or would work.
So wait, Stephen, did you want to go?
We can go.
Okay, thanks. So like I've just kind of had this idea that kind of came from, you know, like entrepreneurs kind of like projecting themselves as confident, like, wow, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like I should probably like, instead of trying to prepare myself for a job, maybe I should prepare myself to kind of start my own company. But like kind of after hearing you speak, it's kind of like I realized maybe I need to be more realistic. So for someone like maybe an undergraduate student who isn't sure, you know, what they want to do, but is kind of like interested in that idea of entrepreneurship, like how should we like kind of check ourselves with reality? Like how do we kind of choose whether should we like prepare ourselves professionally or invest in like intellectually growing to be an entrepreneur, and so on and so forth. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, I mean, one thing is what I said before, which is just like humbly test, right? Like what is it that you would start? What is it that you would do? And what is a way that you can test the viability of that idea and your appetite for pursuing it in a humble way? So, right, like most people have an idea and they pitch me some crazy app or some crazy thing. I'm like, listen, I don't know if you know how software is built, but you just pitched me an $800,000 project that's going to take you 2 years. So maybe what would it look like if you had to do it within a month for $5,000? And how can you start it while you're still at school? And how can you get feedback from the market and see if you have the temperament that can, when it's not so sexy anymore, when it's not this like big, bold, exciting idea that confident people do, when it's actually something you have to chip away at in the sort of quiet of the night, like by yourself, is that something that you like? Like no one's watching, there's no credit, there's no crowd like screaming your name and saying how great you are. This is like you by yourself alone. Do you actually want to do it? Yes or no? And the only way would be to test it, I would say. So I would do it now while you still have some time and you're on campus and you're sort of incubated. Yeah. And then secondarily, like I would just repeat again what I said about like hitting the fastest pitching you can. Like you should aspire to identify what it is about yourself that you love and grow that thing as much as you can grow it. And what is the room where that would be given the opportunity to grow the most? What is the room to which you'd feel most connected, most alive, most excited? And if that's going to Bain or Goldman Sachs, do it. And if that's starting a company, do it. And there are a lot of things in between. And then the last thing I'd say is like, I have grown more than I could possibly put into words through a lot of pain and suffering, mind you, these past 5 years. And it's like turning the volume knob up on everything. So if you were to start your own thing, you'll learn a lot about yourself, what you're good at, what you're bad at, you know, who your real friends are, what have you. So when in doubt, like, give it a shot and learn some things about yourself and then apply them to what you do thereafter.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
So you mentioned the book, The Lean Startup, as a good book on measuring the metrics of scaling. I was just wondering if you were able to apply the principles in the Lean Startup in the hub when you're scaling that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did so sloppily, right? Like if I'd really read that book carefully, and there are a lot of other books that I would recommend. I'm happy to, over email or whatever, if people want to reach out to me afterwards. But I did so sloppily, right? Like I raised an outsized friends and family round. In the end, it ended up being $1.7 million. And I had a very early idea that I poured gasoline on top of. And so when you have an early idea, an analogy I give sometimes is like if a plane were to be 1 degree off in its navigation, it might land in like Alaska instead of Florida. So if you're just a little bit off and you have a lot of money behind your idea or a lot of people or a lot of power, you can end up terribly in the wrong place. So I made that mistakes on several occasions whereby I didn't follow the tenets of the lean startup and I projected thought outwards rapidly and with immense force and power in the form of capital. And then when I realized my mistakes, I was quite sizably from where I should have been if I had been more humble and patient. And so it's through making that mistake on several occasions that I've really realized like you have to move slowly. You have to sort of check in with where you are vis-a-vis where you'd like to be or where the market wants you to be, and then to rectify that delta by changing your course. So I really believe that the only way to build a company successfully is to move slowly, check in, iterate, move slowly, check in, iterate, and do that quickly and consistently for years. And I wish I'd had the courage or the mentorship or the patience to do that from the get-go instead of having to eat shit for 3 years and spend millions of dollars to learn that lesson.
That was helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, James.
Oh, Princeton 2011 in the house.
2010, actually.
2010, sorry.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts on building a team, whether that's like from ground zero with a co-founder, or just building the team up around you as you kind of go from start to later stages. Like, how do you kind of identify the gaps, and how do you, when you're filling them? Any thoughts around that? I think might be useful.
Yeah. So thank you, Jameson. In romantic intimacy, like, there's like the dating process where you sort of half show who you are and half of it's a performance. And then there's that like random Tuesday 3 months in where you're like your real, true, unadulterated self. And it's incredibly scary to like take that for that first Tuesday to occur where you're like, I'm not going to mask or alter who I am in any way. And there can be immense intimacy in that moment, but also fear, right? And when I started the company, I was incredibly fearful of showing the warts of the company. Like, as a sole founder, like the early people that joined me, I was so scared that if I showed them how ugly the company was, if I made them shoulder some of the risk that I was shouldering, that I would never forgive myself if it failed and these poor people had risked things financially or opportunity cost or what have you. And so I really sort of held all of the risk myself, all of the equity. I paid everyone market rate. I didn't let people like get in cahoots with me and like really link arms, right? And I thought I was sparing people, but as it turns out, like in love and in life and in business, I think it's those people with whom you can share your burden. It's letting people hold on to the risk with you, where like intimacy is formed, right? Where you become better, they become better, and the best stuff happens. And so it's taken me years to like trust people. I think Jason's on the line, who's someone I trust and have gotten very close to. Shannon, who unfortunately has COVID, but is sort of my de facto co-founder after all these years. There are people that I have slowly let in and let carry the burden. And to my great surprise, upon carrying said burden, I think they are better for it and happier for it. And the company certainly is better for it. And I wish that upstream I'd have had the courage to trust others more and bring people in more sort of in a more integral capacity.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of based off of finding a team, are there certain quality, like in the interview process, or people who like here who want to work at startups or maybe want to start their own company? A lot of people getting out of college have never interviewed someone before, and it's very different being the interviewee and then being the interviewer. So I was wondering if you could provide any insight on that, like what you look for in someone that you're interviewing, and also as an interviewer, what you look for in the other way, like what kind of questions do you want them to ask or things like that.
Yeah, well, one thing really quickly, I think I have a cleaner answer for this, but one point that, like, forgive me for sounding like an old man, but like I've dealt with a lot of people your age, Naomi, just because of the nature of what we do, like a lot of young photographers, a lot of young interns, employees, what have you. And like Michael, who's on the phone, is a glaring exception to this. Simon, who's on the phone, he's 17 and he's my chief of staff. Both huge exceptions, but there's immense entitlement. Like there's this excitement of entrepreneurship that draws people in. Then when the going gets tough, most of the young people that I've worked with like don't have the fortitude, the stick-to-itiveness, the intensity, the dedication. There's a lot of sort of frivolity and expectancy that I've experienced, particularly in like the younger generation, which feels weird to say, but I do think there's a difference. So I think a way you can distinguish yourself, Naomi, and like other people that are listening is like, be fucking passionate about something, man. Like it doesn't have to be my company, but like when I'm interviewing someone and I can tell that they have a profound passion for something they're building, working on, thinking about, that distinguishes them from so many young people that are just sort of floating along and expecting something of the world. I think putting something out with some sort of fervor and vulnerability is something that I'm very drawn to in other people. And I don't really let myself get close to, or the company get close to, people who don't exhibit that. So that's one thing. But I think try before you buy is probably the best advice I can give. Like everyone says a lot of shit. The like interview process, like I think quite good at reading people. It's fucking hard to have a conversation or two or three and really pin someone down. So a lot of people, Jameson, who asked the last question, did a 2-week consulting gig when he quit his last job, and he's now an entrepreneur himself. And I've always respected Jameson, 2 years older than me at Princeton, really, really smart, really clear thinker. So I said, hey, can you come for 2 weeks and just consult for us? And he's been a loyal advisor and helper and thinker since, right? And I got to sort of try him out for 2 weeks before we built a pretty intimate relationship. And the same thing holds true for most employees. Shannon, who's my co-founder, she was a photographer in the community working at Chick-fil-A. And I gave little tasks to her and other members of the community brick by brick. And as they crushed them, bigger and bigger and bigger ones, her first salary was 38 grand a year, then 45 a month later, then 54. And I won't say what she makes now, but she's probably had 6 promotions in, 2 years, because she exceeded expectations at every twist and turn. So don't like fancy yourself to be some sort of reader of people. Just give someone an opportunity, trust them fully, and then be prepared for them to disappoint you, because unfortunately it happens more than you think.
Yeah.
I will observe, this is very interesting. I went to an elite day school, and then I went to Princeton University, and I'm not proud of this fact, but I think if I were really honest, I'd say that I was somewhat elitist in terms of thinking that people such as yourself, Naomi, like incredibly smart, like went to Princeton and so on, that they would be the makings of the best teammates. I have 4 employees right now, and not one of them went to college at all. One of them's in high school, right? And so like I've seen Princeton I've hired 3 or 4 Princeton students full time. I've watched them get punched in the mouth and their knees buckle and they hit the floor. And then Simon, who's our 17-year-old, he's up with me at 6 a.m, 3 days a week doing strategy sessions before high school. Like he just fucking cranks, right? And like, that's not on a resume. So
Yeah.
I listened to this guy, Jocko Willink. He's like a little kitschy and cute, but he's a Navy SEAL, and the dude wakes up at 4:30 and he just sort of sucks the marrow out of life. And I'm drawn to people like that, who like, they just fucking want it, man. Like you can tell, like for whatever reason, whatever chip they have on their shoulder, they want something out of this world, and they want to give something to this world so goddamn badly that they're busting at the seams. And that kind of energy, if harnessed properly, can really, really make an impact. My dad would always say, it's better to tame a stallion than prod a mule. Like you don't want some sleepy, expectant person that you have to prod constantly. You want a stallion that you have to rein in.
Sure. Yeah. Any last minute questions or thoughts from the crowd? Awesome. I mean, so kind of to conclude, James, is there any the Princeton entrepreneurship community?
You want me to tell you the answer to entrepreneurship in one closing statement? Is that what you're about to ask?
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to make a closing statement. Oh, great. Well, Stephen kind of segued perfectly into my closing. So Stephen asked, is there a way they can contact you for further questioning? I just wanted to ask you, if you want to, like, how do you want to stay involved with the Princeton entrepreneurship community, for everyone that's kind of on gap year,
Yeah,
starting their
I'm
own.
really excited about this, Naomi. I'm like really proud of you. Like, I don't know you that well, but I just really like what you're doing. Like, you know, Jameson, if you're still on the line, like this didn't exist when we were at Princeton, right? Like Jameson, you know, forgive me, Jameson, for blowing up your spot, but Jameson like crushed Princeton, Orphe major, was a rower, went to Goldman Sachs, went to Harvard Business School, went to Bain. Like his pedigree reads like something out of a dream, right? And it took him till age 30 something to become an entrepreneur. Same thing for me, right? And like I played a lot of sports as a kid, and I never called myself an athlete because I never really thought I was one. I studied photography at Princeton, but I would never call myself an artist or a photographer. But I am a fucking entrepreneur. Like it is in my soul. And it took me a long time to find it. So I'm very excited for all of you listening that like you have access to this. You can taste this. Like this is something that you can try while you're still under the auspices of a relatively safe university experience. Um, and that's fucking awesome. So take advantage of it and like find people like me that are like a step or two or three ahead of you and pick their brains. And like I'm very eager to stay involved and like I want people to find this path. It's not for everyone, but for those who will find value in this path, it would make me so happy if a 22-year-old version of me found this path sooner and I hadn't burned 8 years like trying to be something that my parents would be proud of or some shit. So all that to say, I'm happy for you guys and I'm happy to stay involved. I can just give you my contact info, Naomi, and whether it's like a vague conversation about life. Mental health is something we didn't talk about at all, but I struggle with depression and like talking about that a lot because I think a lot of people struggle silently and I like to destigmatize it. Or if you have like a business idea and you want me to kick the tires on it, I'm happy to beat the shit out of your pitch deck and be an asshole.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, thank you so much, for kind of offering yourself in that way to the Princeton community. It's kind of incredible that, you know, to have a mentor to like get this advice so early on. Yeah, would love to kind of share your contact information with everyone that like registered and, you know, send forward along to my team and kind of beyond. And yeah, I mean, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is 6 o'clock. But I do want to say, you know, thank you, James, so much for being here with us. And thank you so much. Shout out to Sakina and Ben Kai, who I don't think made it to this call, but for helping me put together the kind of interview questions and all of that. So yeah.
Yeah. And sorry, no, I mean, one last thing, and you know this because I've introduced you to a few of them, but like, I don't even network that much. Like I don't go out of my way to find people like this, but there are so many people of my vintage at Princeton that I'm sure would echo my sentiments, which is to say they have found entrepreneurship a bit later. They're very passionate about it. They're interesting, switched on people. So I am a temperament and some people listening might see themselves in me and other people are like, who the fuck is this guy? Like I'm like a developer and I'm the exact opposite than this guy. There are a lot of people that I think, yeah, so I'd love to help you like stand up like Jameson would be great, you know, to talk, and he's helped me a lot. And I know 50 other people like that. So there are a lot of people out there. And I think like closing the loop, Princeton always talks about how great its network is. I've never particularly taken advantage of it, but I think if we can offer that to people that are current students that have these questions, there are a lot of different people with a lot of different advice that's probably better than mine in many cases.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that would be incredible. Incredible. I mean, just for everyone who's still listening, I mean, James has really opened up a lot of cool opportunities with alumni that I'm really excited to share with the Princeton community, especially the Princeton entrepreneurship community. And so again, just to reiterate, like super appreciative of one, having this talk, and of you just being so open to mentorship and kind of staying involved.
Open book. Thanks, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. I'll catch you later.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone.